And joining me to discuss this is a public affairs analyst, Ambrose Ibuke. Good to have you join us, Ambrose Ibuke. Now, let's look at the situation here in Myanmar. The military was guaranteed about 25 seats in parliament. And sorry, we do not have Ambrose Ibuke. We have Joshua Onyenwere. Good to have you join us, Joshua Onyenwere. I needed to make that correction. The military was guaranteed about 25 seats in parliament, and that was constitutionally guaranteed. So why do you think that they would pull away from such an agreement that guarantees them 25 seats in parliament and a hold of some powerful ministries?
Thank you for having me. First, let's keep in mind that the constitution that the Myanmar democratic system is currently using was formulated by the same military, which, like you mentioned, guarantees them about 25% in the parliamentary seats. Unfortunately, what many are currently speculating is that the military chief, who is supposed to retire this summer, is the one who is pushing for this, who actually pushed for the coup. And one reason for that is because he wants to continue to stay in power, as well as prevent the inquiry or investigation into his criminal past.
There are now fears that this could be like a prelude to a wider clampdown, maybe on journalists, on activists. Do you see that happening in the coming days?
Absolutely. I mean, the Myanmar military has a bad record of, human rights abuses and clampdown activists. It wouldn't be surprising if that happens. I mean, considering their past records. What would be more concerning would be, in addition to the military clamping down on its civilians, would be the sanctions from the international community, which will further, jeopardize the young Myanmar democracy.
Absolutely. You mentioned sanctions. U.S. President Joe Biden has called on Myanmar's military to relinquish power back to Aung San Suu Kyi, and they've also threatened to review sanctions. How far do you think this pressure will go?
Quite limited, because from past records, there were sanctions for almost 3 decades against the Myanmar military, which took almost 3 decades before they actually considered devolving power to the civilian rule. So it's quite I wouldn't expect much from the military to shift grounds considering the sanctions.
We know that the United Nations Security Council is to meet today, which is Tuesday. Ahead of that meeting, China has said that the focus should be on reconciliation. What should be the array of options here in terms of how to deal with the situation in Myanmar?
First, sanctions would be the best. Negotiations is imminent in order to compel the military to, return power to the civilian rule. The first thing that is needed at this point would be certainly negotiation, but that will be difficult considering the strong interest the military has, particularly the chief security of the military has in staying in power. He doesn't intend to retire anytime soon, and we will continue, as he has stated, that the military will be in power for not less than 1 year. So this is a huge concern. I hope that the international community will be able to directly pressure the military chief.
Absolutely.
Rather than sanctioning the entire nation.
I was just going to go there, because there's always a challenge with sanctions. People are worried that when you put that kind of economic sanctions on a country that is just recovering, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic, it could also have implications for the people. And what sort of targeted sanctions would you like to see, especially on the military?
Yes, that'll be direct sanctions on the military themselves, freezing their both foreign and local assets if they can freeze their local assets, and putting sanctions on their family members, if possible. Although this would perhaps be a criminal move, but holding their family members who are not currently within the country, wherever they are, to put pressure on them back home.
China is a big factor here. China has very strong economic ties with Myanmar, mutually beneficial. China has a good relationship with the military faction and as well as the Aung San Suu Kyi faction. And it does look like China is not looking at sanctions. Again, they have put out a statement saying they want reconciliation. So how can they bring China to the table? And if China refuses sanctions, what would that mean for the process?
Well, it would be difficult for China to sanction another nation. I mean, China is one of the few countries that will go the path of sanctions. If anything, China is always against sanctions. But one thing that is common that we have seen over the years is that China, many of the anti-national agitators often use weapons from China to fight the nationalist government. But now that this issue has happened, China has stated that it really doesn't have any domestic interest in Myanmar, aside, power going back to the civilian rule, because China always, as based on history, stand for elected government. But, it's not only China. We have Russia, because Myanmar's military have strong relations with Russia. And at the moment, I don't think the Russian government has released a statement regarding the coup d'etat from the military. So we hope that the international community, through the United Nations and the United States, will be able to force these two strong nations, that is China and Russia, to pressure the military to return the civilian elected president, who in the San Suu Kyi, back to the presidency.
You mentioned weapons, and you also mentioned, that's from China. You also mentioned military ties between Myanmar and Russia. So should there be some sort of arms embargo along with these sanctions?
If you have arms embargo, I mean, what changes would it make at this point? Especially when the conflict, if there is a conflict, it will be between the people and the military. The military already, presumably has the enough firepower to overpower its people, who probably would have, lesser firepower. So fire embargo, if there is any, would actually jeopardize the military, the firepower from the people. But what the international community should do in this case, in my own opinion, wouldn't be strong sanctions like the U.S. is currently moving to do. The Myanmar military doesn't care about this kind of sanctions. All they care about is what they want to do and how they achieve that. But what I think is the best way forward in this case, in order to alleviate the current problem of the pandemic and the economic hardship on the people, would be to pressure directly the military heads themselves.
I will see what sort of international cooperation we're going to see from that meeting by the United Nations Security Council. Global Affairs Analyst Joshua Onyenwere, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.